Okay, so we've looked at a lot of different chord types now. We've built triads on every degree of the major scale and every degree of the minor scale, and we've heard a lot of different qualities of chords coming through. Now, we know that we can actually harmonise any diatonic melody just with the chords that you build on the tonic, the subdominant and the dominant. But we also now know that there's all these other chords that we could use. So it's a time to start perhaps playing around with that and hearing what we can do using that familiar melody again, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Okay, so we've heard this melody in week 1. Now we've used it a few times today. So far today we've talked about harmonising it just with chord 5, the dominant, and chord 1, the tonic, and we heard the kind of important structural impact that this has on the melody. Now we're going to hear it just with chords 1, 4 and 5, and then we're going to take some other chords and make it sound a wee bit more interesting. So Nicky's going to play the guitar.
It's not my guitar, this is Zach's guitar, and he's being very kind and trusting by lending it to me because I'm not really a guitarist. But we thought that probably quite a lot of you will have guitars around at home, and also we're going to sort of teach you turning around in this format. Might just give you a break from the way we've been teaching at the piano and give you an insight to how we learn how to do things as well.
Okay, so I'm going to sing the melody, Nicky's going to harmonise it using chords 1, 4 and 5. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Okay, so it's just the first phrase, but we're using chords 1, 4 and 5, and you hear how the melody sounds and you hear it at its cadential point. So, let's try something different. Let's take another one of the chords we've learned, and this is arguably the next most important and the next most common chord. We're going to use chord 6 this time.
Okie dokie.
In the key of G, that is the chord of E minor. That's chord 2. We're going to have chord 6, which is E minor in the key of G. Thank you. Okay, so what I want you to do is just have that just at the last chord in that phrase. And we're going to hear how just a subtle change in chord makes a real difference to the feel and the overall effect of the harmonisation of the melody. Okay, so let's try it again. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Okay, so again we've got this completely different sound when we arrive at that chord, and it's interesting because it gives the melody a different colour and it gives us a new direction to go off in.
But it kind of works because that chord that we just used, chord 6, has the scale degrees in it 6, 1, 3, and that overlaps a lot with the scale degrees that you get in the tonic chord 1, 3 and 5, which we were using before.
Okay, let's try a different one. This time what we're going to do is we're going to extend the feeling that we get towards the end of the phrase. What I want you to do is just before the 5 chord, which in the key of G is D, I want you to just put a wee A minor chord in. Now's your chance to have the A minor chord in place.
There it is.
That's it, A minor, okay? So that's chord 2 in the key of G, G's chord 1, A minor's chord 2. Let's try exactly the same thing again and see what happens, all right?
Okay.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. So the progression we got there was 2, 5, 1 in the key of G. And this is really important, particularly for those of you who've maybe come to this course from a jazz background. This is something you'll recognise, whether or not you're necessarily familiar with the theory of it, but that's a sound that's really important.
And I think that's enough of me massacring Zach's guitar. So now what we're going to do is go back to the piano, and we're going to then look again at some more of these typical patterns where we're using chords like 2 and 6 to extend and elaborate the basic harmonic functions that we've seen we can get with mainly chords 1 and 5, and sometimes with chords 1, 4 and 5. So we've now seen that there are some really important structural moments called cadences, and we've seen a few ways that we can travel. We know that we have to go from 5 to 1. We've seen from the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star examples there that a common way of getting to the 5 to the 1 is to put a chord 4 in beforehand. 4, 5, 1, and that sort of elaborates and extends that progression. So if we were in G major, then a 4, 5, 1 progression would sound like this. But there are other ways of heading back to the tonic.
Yeah, and another way to do that is to change our dominant chord in some way so that it gives us greater pull back to the tonic. So let's jump back into the key of C, just for ease of example at the moment. So if we're in the key of C, our fifth note is G. So if we build our triad, from there we get G, B, D.
That's our dominant triad.
Dominant triad, and it uses 5, 7, and 2. Now, if we add the 4th degree of the scale to that as well, again, we see it's a third up from our 5th degree there of the chord. We've got 1, G, B, D, F, and this is our dominant 7th chord. We've altered the dominant triad in a way by adding this extra note and giving it a greater sense of pull towards the tonic.
So let's hear how that would play out in that sort of cadential sequence. So the pattern I'm going to play now is chord 5, then chord 5, 7, or dominant 7th, and then back to the 1. So in C major, we would have that's quite a strong cadence, isn't it, with the way that the 5 goes to the 1. So let's just look at about what's working within that cadence. We've got the G with the D, the B and the D in it. Now that chord, we're saying, is a dominant triad of C major. But you might be thinking, what other chords could that be? That could be...
Well, it's just a G major triad, so in theory it could be G major, chord 1 in the key of G major.
Okay, but if we were adding a 7th to it in the key of G major, that would have to be this note, wouldn't it? Because we've got F sharps in G major. So if we had a 7th chord built on G, it would sound like this. And that's not what we were hearing at all. So one reason that this 5, 5, 7, 1 movement sounds quite strong is it's really, really giving us quite emphatically our sense of key. When we get the G7 with an F natural, we know we're not in G major. So we know that that chord is probably going to take us back somewhere in C. The other important features of that dominant 7th chord is that it's not only got the leading note in C major, which is B, and that wants to lead us back to C. So the dominant 7th has got that leading note from B to C, from 7 to 1. The other thing that's going on in a dominant 7th chord is it's got a 4 that also wants to move a semitone. That's the other semitone that happens in our major scale, and that wants to come from 4 down to 3. So there's 2 types of harmonic movement that happen in that dominant 7th that can resolve us back to the 1. Let's just listen to the 5, 5, 7, 1 again. So it's got 2 harmonic pulls in it, going in different directions. So you might have been wondering, now that we've just introduced 4-note chords to you, why we've only been using 3 notes up till now.
Well, there's absolutely no reason why you should have to. We've been talking about triads because it's a good way to illustrate how chords work within keys. But there's some styles of music that almost always use more extended chords. Jazz is a good example of this, where you'll have 7th chords, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, and a lot of alterations to these scale degrees. But actually, we've been talking about harmonic function in a way that focuses on the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant. When we're talking about other styles of music that use more extended chords, this doesn't change. It still works in the same way, but what's important is the addition of extra notes to the chords gives it a different colour, different flavour, and sometimes softens the way that the chords move from one to another.
So we've just heard that progression, 5, 5, 7, 1, and we've heard how strong a perfect cadence that is with the dominant 7th leading back to the tonic. How about, instead of 5, 5, 7, 1, we use the progression 2, 5, 7, 1. Let's hear how different that sounds. Here's 5, 5, 7, 1. And here's 2, 5, 7, 1. Harmonically speaking, that last cadence, 2, 5, 7, 1, has got a lot of strong things going on. It stays very securely within the key. It shows us always where our tonic is, but it's never static. It's got major and minor chords happening in it, and it's got that dominant movement, that dominant seventh movement that gives us the leading note to the tonic and also gives us that semitone action between from scale degree 4 going down to 3.
It's also got a really nice, secure and definite movement happening in the bass. So when Nicky played it, you heard that the top part, the higher sounding notes, moved nice and smoothly from one to the next, moving quite small jumps. But actually what was happening in the bass was we had a big jump from the D up to the G and then down to the C. So what happened was we went from the D up 4 notes to the G and then down 5 notes to the C.
These are big movements. If this were a physical structure, then you could think of it as being really solid. We've got really big, wide-placed pillars, giving you a good foundation on the ground, leading up to the supporting structures of the higher stuff happening at the ceiling.
So what we should do actually is just look at what these notes actually were and then maybe draw your attention to a pattern that you'll remember from previous weeks. So if we look at the D to the G, this is a 4th, and then from the G to the C, this is also a 4th. So you might remember the circle of fifths when we were talking about key signatures, and what we said was if you went clockwise around the circle of fifths, each jump that you made progressed you a fifth, a perfect fifth. But we actually said that if you looked anti-clockwise around the same circle, you would move in 4ths. D to G is a 4th, and G to C is a 4th, regardless of the fact that when we actually played the piece of music, we moved from a G down to a C. This again serves to show that up a 4th and down a 5th are equivalent to take you to the same note.
Some harmonic progressions sound more logical and flowing than others, and they tend to get used more than others. And quite often, it's this root movement of the chord working with the cycle of fifths that's actually producing this very flowing sound. Another feature of a harmonic progression that can make it sound really coherent is where a particular pattern gets repeated within the progression. So some of the most memorable harmonic progressions that get most commonly used might include both circle of fifths, and they might keep going with that some way. We've included an example here, and you might well recognise this one. There's some more in the supplementary material for you to follow up with.